Hi, my name is Amaya John, and I'll be going over my programming assignment 4. Give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, so I have my header class, my header file, and we have our 3 different classes: recipe, steps, recipe, and recipe book. We have our typical private members, and we're getting them, and we're setting them. And then we have our default constructor, and I created a 3 parameterized constructor and a 2 parameterized constructor. And then I'm sorry, I forgot to mention our insertion operator, which is just going to be printing the recipe step when needed. And then it's the same thing, similar to recipe step, except in recipe we have our destructor, our copy constructor, and our deep copy operator overload. And we also getters and setters. Then we also have our CRUD functionality where we have to create or add, delete, update, and print. And then same thing for recipe book. We also have our destructor, copy constructor, and deep copy operator overload, assignment operator overload, and our CRUD functionality for recipe. And yes, okay. All right. For recipe step, for our default constructor, we just set everything equal to 0 because it's the default. And for our parameterized constructor, we're setting everything equal to whatever is in the parameter. And our getters are just returning the private member values, and our setters are just setting it to whatever is equal to whatever is in the parameter. And our insertion operator is returning a type O stream, and it's taking in a object of recipe step. So it will print it in this order here. And similar to recipe step, recipe does the same thing with the insertion operator and the same thing with getters and setters. And for our except for our default constructor for recipe, we are creating a dynamic array of recipe steps. A dynamic array of recipe steps, and we're calling it steps. And when we do that for our default constructor, we also have to do it for 4 parameterized and 2 parameterized constructor. And our default constructor is just deleting our array that we created earlier called steps, and our copy constructor is copying all the static information, and then it is creating the dynamic array of recipe steps, and then copying that information that we had earlier into steps. Yeah, like the information in in the parameter in the parameters and being copied in steps. Yeah. And the same thing with the operator overload, except we have to delete steps because the object has already been created beforehand. So we have to delete that object in order to copy the contents into the new object. And then for our CRUD functionality, it's just the growth algorithm for adding steps, creating a new temporary array, then copying the original array into the temporary array, then deleting the original array, and then having a pointer to setting the pointers equal to each other in the sense that the size is greater than the capacity. If it's not, then it will just be whatever's inputted into the parameter will then be put into that index and like increase as it loops through. Deleting the step is where we're finding the ID number given to us by the user, and then we're copying the contents before the we we find the position. Once we get once we get the ID from the user, then we are copying, we find that position, and then from the position we're copying the contents before it and the contents after it, and then we're decrementing the size. So it so that is going to be deleted. The position that was put in is deleted, and then the size, decrementing the size accounts for that deletion. Updating the step is similar to deletion, where we're finding the position through the user inputting the number or the ID, and then we're setting that description to whatever the user decides they want to change it to. And then the printing or the reading, the recipe is just reading what is in the recipe. Recipe book is the same thing, getting and setters, returning the value, not returning the value, insertion, like just printing the book title. And recipe book is the same default constructor. We have to create recipes, except it has an dynamic array of recipes. And then our destructor is deleting the dynamic array of recipes. And our copy constructor is the same thing as the copy constructor and recipe. And the operator overload is the same thing in recipe. Yeah. And then adding and deleting and updating and printing are the same thing. As I mentioned earlier, except update is a little bit different, where we asking for user input, and we're instead of using setters, we're using a constructor. For recipe book, it's easier to explain as I put in the thing, as I compile. So 1 second, of course. You can like fast forward this. Okay, so here in our main, we're asking the user what their name of their recipe book is. I'm just gonna call it Amaya's cookbook. And then we're asking the name for their first recipe. I'm gonna call it ice cream. And then we're describing it here. And I'm just gonna call it dessert. ID, we're gonna say it's 1. And then here we're printing out using the insertion operator right here. And that's the format that I printed in. Now here, moving on, it's calling the header of the recipe steps. So I'm just gonna call it add. The first step in the sequence is 1, of course. So I'm just gonna call it, say like pour like 2 cups. I say pour in 2 cups of water. And there's a lot going on because there's no I didn't create a user menu, so I just have to take everything step by step. Okay. So here I asked them, this was the end where I asked them to pour in 2 cups of water. So right now I printed out through the A.print recipe. This is after it's printed out. So over here we added, this is like if the user decided they wanted to create and add more steps, and these are the steps that they like so-called created. They made like a step 2, 3, and 4, and then they added it to the original recipe, which is recipe A, and then we printed it out, and this would be what it is printed out. We see we printed the add, mix, freeze, and enjoy, add, mix, freeze, and enjoy here. Then we said that if the user decides they want to print it, deleted something, they said they wanted to delete step 4. So here, this is the after deletion. So this is the before and this is the after. As you can see, step 4 is deleted. Then they said if the user decides they want to change something. So in this case, they want to change step 1 into pour in 3 cups of water instead of pour in 2 cups of water. So this is the before and this is the after. So as you can see, pour in 2 cups has changed into pour in 3 cups of water. Then we do the case of where the user, if they wanted to copy the steps of recipe A into a new recipe called recipe B. And here we're calling the copy constructor because we're creating an object on the same line as we are assigning it to, well, as A is being assigned into recipe B of a newly created object. So from there, our copy constructor, this would be a copied recipe into recipe B. So here we're printing out recipe B. So this is recipe B and this is recipe A. So recipe B is the same thing as recipe A, as you can tell. And then moving on, if the user decides they want to create a whole bunch of other recipes, these are the recipes that they would have created. So ignoring recipe E, which should be commented out. But let's say they created red velvet cake and baked chicken. So here they added in steps for a recipe for red velvet cake and baked chicken. So C1, C2, C3 goes with C, and D1 and D2 go with D. And here we wanted to just print it out. They wanted to print it out. So they printed out the red velvet cake, and those are the steps for it. And then they printed out the baked chicken, and those are the steps for the baked chicken to make step 1 and step 2. And in the case of where the user wanted to add these recipes into their book that they created at the beginning, then this would be their added recipes. So here we have the ice cream dessert is repeated twice because they had copied it before, and then they had the red velvet cake and the baked chicken. And then another case where the user decides they want to delete a recipe because they realize that, hey, one of my recipes got deleted. Is repeated, so they press in 1 here. They input the number 1 because that is the ID for that recipe, for one of the recipes. So therefore it deletes one of them, and one of them is gone. So now we only have the ice cream, the red velvet cake, and the baked chicken left because we printed it out to see. And now we're going to the change recipe. So we are prompting to user to what they want to change the recipe to, the description and the title. So here the user said that they wanted to change recipe 3, which is baked chicken. So we're gonna just change it to chicken. And then the new description, instead of quick and easy meal, should say simple meal. Ooh, simple meal. So here the change was made, and now instead of saying baked chicken and quick and easy meal, says chicken and simple meal. And now if the user wanted to make another copy of the of the of the book into like a new book, here we're doing a deep copy assignment instead of a copy constructor. Either one can be done, but just to showcase that our deep copy works, we created another book, another object of type recipe book, and called book 2, and then we're copying the contents of book into book 2. And remember, these are the contents of book here. So now when we ask to print out what is book 2, if the user decides to print out book 2, this would be book 2, which is the same thing as book 1 that we made earlier. And that is it. If the user, if we wanted to do a copy constructor, then we would take out book 2 here, and then we would just put equals book here, and that would call the copy constructor. And if we wanted to do it a deep copy operator overload for when we call the copy constructor, then we would move the assignment operator here, and then it would call the deep copy. And either one works when it comes to copying. And that is it. Thank you for watching.